Now it's time for our fireside chat discussion, the past, present, and future of U.S.-China relations, with J. Stapleton Roy, former U.S. Ambassador to China, He Yafei, former China Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs, moderated by Ronnie C. Chan, Chairman of the Asia Society Hong Kong Center. This fireside chat will last roughly 30 minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen, now we come to a very substantive part of our program this evening. The Asia Society was founded by John D. Rockefeller III to enhance understanding between the United States and Asia. Over the last several decades since World War II, a lot has happened in Asia. It went from a very poor part of the world to a relatively wealthy part of the world. We first saw the rise of Japan, and then we have the four little tigers. But eventually, that which really changed Asia the most, and indeed the world, is the rise of China. There's no denying that today, U.S.-China relationship is one of the most important relationships in the world. So this evening, we are very, very honored to have two gentlemen joining us who are both old friends of the Asia Society. And I will go by age. We're delighted to have Ambassador Stapleton Roy. Stape, you're now 85-year-old, but very, very healthy. I'm so happy to see you again. Stape was born in 1935 in China. His Mandarin is very, very good. If not for those of you who don't speak English, who don't speak Chinese here, the three of us could engage in a dialogue in Chinese, and I will be the worst of the three of us. And Stape eventually became the ambassador of the United States to China in the year 1991 to 1995. And he has been following up on global affairs, in particular what is happening in China over the many, many years since. I have always appreciated Stape's very fair-minded view of the world and of U.S.-China relations. Also with us from China is former Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs from mainland China, from the PRC, Ambassador He Yafei. After serving as Vice Minister, he was also for a while the Chinese ambassador to Geneva, to the United Nations in Geneva. And he was certainly considered as one of the top brains in the foreign ministry while he was serving there. So this evening, we are very, very delighted to have two old friends of ours with us. It's going to be a very free-flowing dialogue. I have told Stape and told Yafei beforehand that feel free to budge in, stop me or stop one another. We are all among friends here. And I also told them that there are basically two issues I want to cover. And those two issues are very, very important. The first one is, what went wrong? I think all three of us and many others watching us over the last many decades have tried very hard to improve to better U.S.-China relations. And yet, in the last couple of years, it seems that it has taken a downward turn, perhaps faster than many of us had expected. So the first question I have is, what went wrong? And then thereafter, I'd like to hear from them also, can it be fixed? And if it can be fixed, how can it be fixed? And what is your short-term and longer-term view of U.S.-China relationship? Because whatever happened to this bilateral relations will affect the world. After all, they're the first and second largest economies in the world, the first and second largest trade countries in the world. And so in whichever way you look at it, U.S.-China relationship is the most important bilateral relationship in the world. So Stape, let me turn to you first. Tell us, you have been trying to make U.S.-China relationship better for many, many decades. Apparently I have failed. Maybe you too have failed. Things have turned to the worse. What happened? Stape, tell us.
Fortunately, I majored in history in college. So let me begin with a little bit of history. I agree that the relationship has gone wrong, much more wrong than I thought possible. But I think it can be fixed. But it will take time, and it will take devoted efforts by all parties, not just the United States and China, but also the other countries of East Asia and the world. Let me just make a few quick points. It began with the collapse of the Soviet Union. This left the United States in an unprecedented position in the world because it's extremely rare in history for a country to achieve military dominance because of the collapse of the principal opponent instead of the defeat of the principal opponent. US theory says that power, if concentrated, will be abused. And our domestic political situation is based on that understanding. But we didn't apply it to the international situation. For us to be the sole superpower was dangerous because it was certain that we would abuse the power, and yet we didn't understand that. What we should have done is we should have strengthened international organizations and agreed to stay within the limits permitted by those international organizations as a way of balancing us. But we didn't do that. We actually became hostile to international organizations because we liked being the sole superpower. But what we discovered was that being a strong military power did not actually give us the capability to intervene in other countries and produce predictable outcomes. So being the sole superpower actually did not serve US interests. The second factor was the global financial crisis. Before that, even the Chinese believed that we were the masters of the financial universe. And the 2008 financial crisis was the worst economic blow to the advanced capitalist countries since the Great Depression. And so that sapped American self-confidence. It created the image in the minds of many people in the world that the United States and Europe were declining powers. And China recovered from the 2008 financial crisis more quickly than the United States did. So you have the problem of over-concentrated power in the hands of the United States and a setback that damaged our self-confidence. So there was a shift very quickly in the US view of China. We had seen China as a rising power that we could keep a cooperative relationship with until the global financial crisis. And after the global financial crisis, we began to see China as a rising challenger to the US position in the world. And this caused attitudes in the United States to turn more hostile to the rise of China. So that's the problem. And the question is how to fix it. But I will let Ambassador He weigh in on this subject before we get to the question of how to work our way out.
I have been worried very much about the worsening bilateral relationship between China and the United States, which, as you both suggested, is the most important relationship, and how China and the US will act and react to each other not only matters to both countries, but also will affect the future of the world. So we need to be very serious about the worsening situation we have between the two countries. I believe the reason we have arrived at this moment, which I believe is the lowest ebb in our bilateral relationship since 1979, it is both inevitable and accidental. Inevitable in a sense is in the sense that there has been a shift in the balance of power among major powers, especially between China and the United States. I'm not suggesting US is declining in strength. US, I believe, has suffered many setbacks, and for various reasons, Ambassador Roy Ronnie suggested, and for other reasons too. I'm not suggesting that. What I'm suggesting and that China has been growing in economic, political, and military terms, especially economically, because of globalization, because of China's integration into the international free trade system. China has been on a trajectory of high growth for the last 30, 40 years. It is a miracle in human history. Of course, it has a lot to do with the United States, with China's relationship with the US, because in the last 3 or 4 decades, that relationship was overall one of cooperation, with some competition, of course, but mainly cooperation. The shift in the balance of power has caused, over the years, especially in the last decade, a certain degree of strategic anxiety on the part of the United States. It became quite anxious as to how to view China's progress, how to view the potential role China will play in international affairs because of China's political system, what China believes in, and China's growth model, etc. I'll give you one example. I was on a video, Zoom talk with some Europeans a few days ago, and one British scholar told me that the COVID-19 has showed that democracies, those countries with democratic system, they called, were not capable in dealing with COVID-19, at least not as successful as what has done by China. So people in these countries, in UK, for instance, became doubtful of the effectiveness or usefulness of liberal democracy, so-called liberal democracy. And now they are worried about the future because from a global economic view, in at least this year and next year, China probably will be the only country that can register a positive growth. US, European countries, all of them will be in negative growth area, in negative growth. Will that reflect again on whether the system one country follows is better than others? This is not my view. I was saying that, there is no China model, so to speak. There is lots of models. It depends on which country using what model is useful, is effective for that country, bring benefits to its own people, then you can call the success of that model.
Thank you. I think both of you mentioned that there is a perception change, especially in the part of the West, that China is perhaps more powerful and hence a certain shift in the balance of power. But I want to state one question. Is it no way out that the two is destined to having difficult relationship? Can the number one and number two countries in the world work together instead of fight each other? Can we compete in some area, but overall relationship still one of friendliness? Is that a possibility? I refer you to a paper that in 1992, when you were the US ambassador to China State, our other friend, Paul Wolfowitz, wrote a paper that basically later was called the Wolfowitz strategy or doctrine that says that the United States will not allow any country now and later to rise to become a close number two that can threaten the United States in economic, political, military terms. And in those days, Paul Wolfowitz, although a good friend of mine, the support was here, whereas everybody else who are advocating better relationship were up here. But it seems that now there is a shift as China begins to rise. So are the two countries destined to having bad relationships? What is there a scenario you can foresee that the two can work together as while competing, but also friends?
The answer is, my answer, Ronnie, is a very decisive yes. It is possible for us to have both a highly competitive relationship with China and a highly cooperative relationship with China. But that will require changes in attitudes on both sides. Let me briefly comment on Ambassador He's presentation, much of which I'm in agreement with. For example, there is a shift in the global balance of power, and that is causing anxiety on the part of the United States. As I pointed out, the United States was dealing with an unfamiliar problem, an unanticipated problem, which was the collapse of the Soviet Union. China correctly anticipated that its rise was going to cause difficulties with the established power of the United States. And so China set this goal of having peaceful rise or peaceful development, as it was called. But what China did not anticipate was the change in the psychology of the Chinese people that would accompany movement from being a relatively weak power to a relatively powerful country. And that has caused a change in the way that China views the outside world, where China, for example, now links its military strength to its international status, not simply to its defense needs. And it talks about becoming one of the foremost military powers in the world by the middle of the century, which is not that far away, even though China has no international security responsibilities. It's only responsible for its own security. So in other words, if you look at international polling, what you find is that the neighbors of China do not like China's behavior, but because of their economic interrelationships with China, they do not want to choose between Washington and Beijing. So that's a problem for China's diplomacy. America's diplomacy problem is we have not been considering the interests of our friends and allies. And so they don't like our approach to the way that we are playing our role in the world. So in a sense, China and the United States both have a shared problem. As the two most powerful countries in the United States, in the world, we are not behaving the way that other countries would like to see us behave. So that's linked to the question that you just asked. How do we get our way out of this? And the answer is not to deny the competitive aspects of the relationship. Those have to be addressed. And that's going to be a difficult problem. For example, China has not yet defined what the limits on its military power need to be. It has simply said that it needs a powerful military. At the 18th Party Congress, it said it needs a powerful military commensurate with a country's international standing and appropriate for its development and security needs. Okay, and it's now talking about being one of the world's foremost military powers. But what does that mean in Asia? How does Japan, how does Vietnam, how does Korea see their security interests if China is insisting on becoming a global military power? The United States has to adapt to the fact that China in the past has not had adequate military capability to meet its own security needs. That's why in the 19th century, Chinese wars were all fought inside China. And in the 20th century, they were all fought on China's borders. China now wants to be strong enough so it doesn't have to fight wars on its own borders. But the question of how strong is enough? So in getting to where we need to go, we need not only to strengthen the cooperative aspects of the relationship, but we need to find a better way of dealing with the competitive aspects. And the competitive aspects lie in two areas. One is the military. We have to somehow begin a dialogue on how to get a military balance in the Western Pacific that both countries feel is compatible with their own security needs. And the second thing is we need to address the fact that ultimately economic power is the underpinning of national power. So that we are in competition over who will have the leading role in the emerging technologies, artificial intelligence, robotics, things of this sort that will determine national power in the future. And in that area, we have not yet found the right way to handle it. Some people in the United States think that delinking our two economies is the way to go. Actually, that's a very bad approach, because there are many areas where our economy should remain linked together. But in areas that have security considerations, we need to find a better way to separate those out from the dual use technologies, where we in fact need to share technologies as opposed to trying to have proprietary technologies that are kept from the other country. We don't yet have an adequate approach to that question. I think the problem with the current administration in the United States is they have seen the international system as essentially an arena for competition among countries. And they have actually denied the concept that there is a global community. They are wrong. There is a global community. And the global community is based on cooperation among countries. And we see that everywhere. But in China and the United States, what we are seeing now is a growing military rivalry, a growing economic rivalry, and we are not keeping in place the cooperative aspects of the relationship that need to be strengthened. This is a leadership problem, in my opinion, that can be managed properly if we understand the problem properly. You cannot have a sole superpower in the world today. We are going to have a multipolar world. And in that multipolar world, China and the United States will probably be the two most powerful countries, both militarily and economically. The question is, will that be strictly a competitive relationship, or will it also be a cooperative relationship? And I think the cooperative elements have enormous potential that we are not yet handling properly.
Thank you, Steve. Ambassador He, let me ask you about this. Does China really want to change the international order? Is China capable of doing it? Does it want to do it? Do you think that China can work with the United States while competing in many areas such as business and economics, still build a basic trust with the United States such that the two biggest countries will not be at odds with each other? And what about the other countries that State mentioned? The other countries are forced to take sides, and that's not a good sign. And if America is ganging up on China, at least perceived that way, and it's probably true, then what will China do? So can you give us your thought on this, and we will end with that?
Ronnie, it is not what China wants to change the international order or wants this and that. I think it is, as I suggested in my previous presentation, it's a result of the shifting in the balance of power, which will continue to shift, probably in favor of China and other emerging markets. But I agree with Ambassador Roy, that US and China are definitely not destined for full confrontation. The two biggest powers in the world, the two biggest economies of the world, cannot afford to have a full confrontation, to fall into the so-called Thucydides trap. We can fix it. We can reverse what is happening now. Definitely. I firmly believe we're capable of doing that, and we are wise enough in trying to find solutions to it. Let me follow Ambassador Roy's example by looking into the history in the past 40 years between China and the United States. The reason we did cooperate, we could cooperate, was quite clear because we share common interest in some areas. We have a match in some aspects of our strategic interests. For instance, in early 1970s, Ambassador Roy was a participant when China and the US decided to open up or reopen its door towards each other. It is both for the reason of the former Soviet Union. The former Soviet Union. We have a common, not, I don't want to say enemy, but we have a strategic consideration which was shared by both. And then with globalization, with China being gradually integrated into the global trading system, China and the US economically are moving ever closer to each other, bring huge benefits. It's obvious for China. It is also obvious for the United States, the two biggest economies. So we are not destined for war, as Professor Allison has suggested. We're not destined for full confrontation. We do have hope that cooperation will eventually prevail. Because of the same reason, we can find commonalities in our strategic interests. For instance, each country now faces huge domestic problems. China needs to have a favorable international environment for its economic transition to what we are calling the dual circulation, to rely more on domestic consumption to promote economic growth, to adapt China to the shifting global supply chains, for instance. So, and other problems too. Lots of problems. For the US, deep social division, populism, anti-globalization, especially the increasing inequality, increasing gap between rich and the poor, which was driving US politics to the extreme, to identity politics, to a total mess, as I saw it in coping with COVID-19. So in order for both countries to address properly its domestic problems, we need a favorable international environment which is peaceful, at least peaceful, and good for economic growth.
Thank you, Stape. Thank you, Yafei. It has been a wonderful dialogue. I wish we can have more. I'll conclude this way. 30-some years ago, I got involved in the Asian Society, recognizing the value that it brings to the world, albeit in a small way. And little did I know that 30 years later, the need for Asian Society and similar organizations to enhance dialogue between all the nations of the Pacific Basin area should have increased so much. So I think that I look forward to the next 30 years, whoever the leaders of the Asian Society may be. I think there is a need for it to work even double time in order to make the Pacific Basin and indeed the world a better place. Thank you very much, Ambassador Stapleton Roy and Vice Minister He Yafei, for your contribution. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ronnie.
Thank you.
Thank you.